Welcome back to all of our members of Parent Tween Village. I am super excited to continue the conversation that we started with Jen Rafferty. So, Jen, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
And we were just talking about neuroplasticity, understanding that we are who we think we are, not just what's doled out to us, in terms of good looks and brains on the day we come onto this planet. And we talked about shooting on ourselves and such. And we're going to continue the conversation now that I think is kind of like the next step in some ways. Like if we don't get some of those other aspects managed more effectively, it's really easy to head into burnout. Been there, done that. And I have actually identified for myself, I went through mental burnout and I went through emotional burnout. And for me, they were two very different experiences. I don't know if there's any science behind it, but that's how I defined it. But let's talk about burnout to start with. And then let's dive into what you identify as the burnout renewal cycle. And let's see
Mhm.
where we go.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, that's interesting that you said you made that kind of differentiation between your mental burnout and your emotional burnout. There are no rules to this. I think if I'm understanding this correctly, compassion fatigue often is part of what can contribute to emotional burnout.
Hmm.
When you just stop feeling anything and there's a sense of apathy and, there's all sorts of physical things that come along with burnout too, and it's not sustainable, and unfortunately there are so many people experiencing it that it's become normalized. We kind of joke about it in some ways, like, there's that meme that I always show during my presentations and workshops and things of, the dog in the room with all the flames and the fire, and he's like, it's fine, it's fine,
Everything's
and
fine.
everything's fine, it's totally fine. And no, it's not fine, and we need to acknowledge it, but I think there's a part of us that become so resistant to acknowledging it because we're afraid of what's behind the door. And
Mm.
the truth is, what's behind the door is healing.
It's the fire
And
extinguisher.
it's literally a fire extinguisher. But we've become so used to living in the fire that it becomes normal. It becomes our way of life. And that safety that I talked about in the last conversation that we had, our nervous system wants you to be safe,
Hmm.
period. You are not your brain. You are a person who has a brain, and your brain's job is to keep you alive. And so even though living in that fire, so to speak, isn't serving you, it feels normal and therefore safe. So
Hmm.
your brain is going to do everything it possibly can to keep you in that space because that's what it knows. It doesn't have any evidence of the fire extinguisher. But everything that's possible for you is on the other side of that door.
Hmm.
And so, the burnout that you feel is is a obviously a huge warning sign. And the warning sign is for you to again wake up and start paying attention. What is happening in my body right now? Because that's the other thing. Like you can't see your thoughts, but you can feel your feelings, and your feelings happen in the body, thoughts happen in the mind. So I'm constantly talking about the body because that's actually where all the information is. So what is your body telling you right now? I have clients that come to me and they're like, "Oh, Jen, I'm like, how's it going today?" And they're like, "Oh, it's great, but I've had this headache for 3 weeks and I really don't know why." And it's like, okay, so let's pause for a second. What is this headache telling you? Because it's not that you don't know why; it's that you're not listening.
Hmm.
And so when we again just kind of keep pushing it down, that's when the burnout happens, and then we're no good to anybody. We don't show up for our kids, we don't show up at work, we don't show up for ourselves, we don't show up for the impact that we want to make in this world. We can't do anything when we're feeling this way. So that's kind of the where I think we are in the climate of how we feel about burnout right now.
Hmm. So then where does renewal come in?
Yes. So the sacrifice renewal cycle is something that I learned a long time ago. And is this is a really important piece of regaining that sense of agency again, of like, I can actually change things for myself. So there's a step before the sacrifice renewal cycle, because one of the things that I think we get so caught up of is like, well, we'll just think positive. We just got to be positive. And if we think positive enough, well, then everything will be fine. And that's frankly really very dangerous, because when we're throwing positivity on something that hurts, you're not making the hurt go away. You're actually covering it with other stuff, and it's
Hmm.
going deeper. So it's really important that we don't have any sort of emotional bypass in all of this. If you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling resentful, if you're feeling rage, if you're feeling grief or depression, it is your beautifully human responsibility to acknowledge and honor all of the emotions that come up and actually feel them.
Hmm.
It is necessary for you to create safety in feeling your emotions, especially for those of us who were brought up in households where you just didn't. It wasn't a part of the family culture. It wasn't safe to be anything except pleasant and happy.
Yep.
Right. So
Yep.
crying is going to feel profoundly uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Screaming is going to feel profoundly uncomfortable. And yet, emotions need to be expressed physically because that's where they live.
Is
And
in the
so
body.
it's
Yeah.
in the body. And so it has to be physical. So there are a few things that I always recommend before we even get to that sacrifice renewal cycle is feel your feelings. Whether that's I always recommend going to a rage room. I don't know if you've ever been to a rage room. Highly
Not
recommend.
yet.
Okay, make it a stop.
The
Go
gym
to
is
go
a
to a
stop.
rage.
As my husband puts it, pick up heavy shit, put heavy shit
Yeah.
down.
That's it. And now here in that rage room, you get to throw it and you get to smash it. And
Let's
it feels
go.
amazing. Yes. And you get to scream and you get to rage and you get to do it in a way that is safe and productive and healthy. If a rage room isn't nearby, like go upstairs, grab a pillow and just hit the bed as hard as you can to get it out. If you're a runner, go for a run, go to the gym, but have that emotion in front of mind. So you are processing through. Another thing that I do is I scream into my elbow and I scream as loud as I can, and then the tears come, and we create safety in the tears. And here's another thing about crying is that we've been taught and told that crying means something. Crying means you're weak. Crying means you're too vulnerable. Crying means there's something wrong with you. Crying needs to be stopped and fixed. The truth about crying is that it is simply unprocessed emotions being processed through your body. That's it. That is all it
Hmm.
is. That is all crying is. So if we let go of all the stories about all of this, we can finally process these emotions in ways that we need to in order to do the next step, which is to heal. We
Hmm.
cannot emotionally bypass over these things. You can't
Right.
just cherry pick the good emotions and be like, yeah, I'm great. I'm just going to feel freedom and love and joy and bliss and happiness and excitement, because your ability to feel all of those things completely is dependent on your ability to feel all of these things completely too. And
Sure.
they're not good or bad. They are empowering and disempowering, but we need to feel all of it because that's a beautiful gift we have to be able to feel this incredible spectrum of emotions. And in denying that, you're actually denying it all.
Hmm.
So that's step one,
It's powerful.
isn't it?
Well, and what's coming up for me is then, for those of us who grew up in the you better stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, right?
Mhm.
Which is not just that it's not acceptable, but that it's not that bad, knock it off. It's, lots and lots and lots of judgment. Taking the step for the kids in our world to give them the space to learn this, right? Like you're speaking to the parents right now and to the adults, right? Like let it out. But then not only do we need to let it out, not only do we need to process our own stuff, but we need to create that environment for the kids in our world so that our successors in our professions are not telling the kids 30 years from now when they're adults that they need to cry, right? Go find a rage room. Like we need to stop that cycle. How do we, once we've figured it out for ourselves, how do we then make it okay for the kids to express these things?
That's all you actually need to do is make it okay for yourself. That's
Yeah.
it. There is no second step. Because in this question, there's no second step, because what happens is a child acts out, right? There's some emotional something going on. We as the adults squash it down because of our discomfort with that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And then take it a step further. A child acts out and there's a behavior, but underneath the behavior is some sort of emotional situation that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of addressing that emotion, we punish the behavior and then don't ever circle back to talk about what's actually going on underneath it that caused the behavior in the first place, because we have been so emotionally congested. So how do we do this for our kids? We do this for ourselves. My kids know I cry all the time. And it's not because I'm sad, but like something beautiful will happen and I'll just let it out. Or I'm frustrated and I'll just let it out. Or something happened the other day and I was feeling really frustrated and I took the cushion pillow and on the other side of the couch, I just started smashing it. And they're like, yeah, mom. And then they got up and then like they did it too. They come with me to the rage room. Like we do it together
That's
because
fantastic.
yeah, because this is the way. It's not outwards, it's inwards. We teach them by going inwards. And that's different than what we've been taught or told or it modeled for ourselves. It was do as I say, not as I do. How often did you hear that growing up?
Oh my gosh, right up there with
Yeah,
don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about.
right. Like it's just bullshit. Like that's just how it is. And so how do we change the story? You change yourself.
Love it.
Yeah.
And
So what yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so then where does that come back to? Circling
Okay.
back to the sacrifice renewal, I'm
Yeah.
guessing that that needs to happen before we can have the renewal.
Yeah, and so it's not linear, right? This happens just cyclical. Like this, it just kind of happens all of the time, right? There are moments of what is my body telling me? What emotion needs to come out right now? Because emotions are temporary, right? You're not going to get stuck there. We're so afraid of getting stuck there. So you go through the emotion and you feel it as much as it needs to be felt, and then you have this beautiful opportunity to actually refill your cup. And I'm not talking about like massages and getting your nails done and taking a mental health day, and I love all of those things. Those things are great, but those are
Mm-hmm.
not sustainable practices for joy and happiness and to really combat that burnout. So there are four things that they found that actually create that filling of one's cup. One of the things you can do, and one of these things has to happen every single day. Not all of them, just one thing. But one of the categories is mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And mindfulness is any sort of practice that brings you back to the present. So those breathing breaks that I talked about in our last conversation, that's a beautiful exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Yoga, prayer, if that's something that you do, meditation, going for a walk, like sitting quietly with yourself and taking a few deep breaths, whatever you need to do to find your center and to be present in the moment is going to be helpful in refilling your cup.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Second thing is hope. Hope, anything that you can feel hopeful about. So whether that's planning a project that you want to do, like a passion project, or planning a vacation, or planning a girls' night, or planning a date night, or
Mm-hmm.
any sort of future planning that gets you into that excitement phase and that hopeful
Mm-hmm.
space. That's
Okay.
another thing. The third thing is compassion. And I'm not talking about the kind of compassion that we experience all day of like the giving, 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 giving that causes compassion fatigue. This sort of compassion is this give and take. So this is, taking your dog for a walk, curling up on the couch with your cat and watching some Netflix. This is calling your friend, right? And connecting with that person back and forth. This isn't like the person you're going to call who's going to talk your ear off about all of their problems. This is someone who you can give and receive, right? Date night, after date night. You
Wink,
know what I
wink,
mean?
nudge, nudge.
Yeah. So like those are the things that are going to actually fill your cup. And then the last category is any sort of joy or playfulness or laughter. I mean, think about how little we laugh throughout the day as adults. And the truth is, something so simple like laughter is actually going to continue to fill up your capacity and actually create a larger capacity for you to continue to give. Because as parents, as educators, we are in service.
Right.
And we need to do this for ourselves, but then we also need to set the example for our kids. So don't tell me I can't go out on Friday night with my girlfriends because I don't want to leave my kids. I feel guilty about it. Your kids need you to go out with your girlfriends so you can come back and be a better mom for them. So you can come back and show them, I love you, sweetie. You are the apple of my eye. And I am a person outside of being your mom. And this is really
Right.
important for you to know because I want this for you too.
Right. Well, and that's something that is, I acknowledge, is kind of a trigger for me personally because I look back and I remember hearing my mom say, I did all this for you, for you, for you, for you, for you, as if she was blaming me for not doing for her. And that was never something that I asked her to do. And it was like, I never asked that of you. Why are you blaming me for it? Like, that was a choice you made,
Yeah,
and it's not nearly as raw as it used to be by a long shot, but it wasn't fair. Like, you're putting those expectations, or those expectations on yourself that nobody else is asking you to do. In fact, we're saying no, go do for you.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's very martyr. It's martyrdom,
It is.
and
Well,
it's not
and that makes
fair.
perfect sense. It makes perfect sense because the generation before her, her mother made choices that created a story for her to show up that way, and her mother before that,
100%.
and her mother before that. And so here we have an opportunity to create generational change and heal generational wounds. But it
Hmm.
has to start with you. It
Indeed.
has to start with you. It is the only place. And I'm glad for you and witness you in this journey where you can talk about this and it not be so raw. But I know that people who are listening to this will resonate. And that
Absolutely.
rawness, like feel it, lean
Hmm.
in and feel
And let it
and make
through.
these choices. That's it. Let it through.
Awesome. Jen, thank you so very much. You've given us a lot of really good stuff to talk about in both portions of our conversation. Again, anybody who's tuning in, Jen primarily supports schools and parents there, but like by extension, there through. If you resonate with what Jen is talking about and you'd like to have her connect with your school or your district, you can find her at Empowered Educator. And Jen, thank you so much for being with us. I know I've learned from you, and I'm hopeful that even just one little bit resonates with folks who've been able to tune in today, because all it takes is one little bit to start creating change.
That's it. Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.